The coldest revenge begins the moment a man realizes he was never being loved, only withdrawn from. Calvin Brooks came home early from Chicago on a Thursday night, snow melting on the shoulders of his overcoat and a small gift box tucked under one arm. His flight had landed 2 hours ahead of schedule, and for once the roads outside Minneapolis had been clear enough to make the drive home feel like a quiet favor from the universe. He had stopped at a little shop near the airport and bought Melissa a pair of silver earrings she had pointed out weeks earlier, the kind of small surprise he still believed mattered after 8 years of marriage. The house was lit when he pulled into the driveway. Warm windows, porch light on, a soft yellow glow spilling across the snow pile beside the walkway. From the outside, it looked like a place where a man could come home and be welcomed. Calvin unlocked the front door carefully, planning to surprise her, but he stopped before he reached the living room. Melissa's laugh floated down the hallway, bright, loose, careless in a way he had not heard directed at him in months. She was on speakerphone with Tara Collins, her closest friend, and the kind of friend who treated cruelty as honesty if it sounded stylish enough. Calvin stood near the entry table, one hand still on his suitcase handle, the gift box pressed against his coat. Tara's voice came through the phone, teasing and sharp. "So what is the plan, Mel? You keep letting him pay for everything until you finally leave." Melissa laughed again. Obviously not forever. Tara said something too low for Calvin to catch. Then Melissa answered clearly, without hesitation, without guilt, without even lowering her voice. "I can dump him anytime. He is just a wallet I have not emptied yet." The hallway went silent around Calvin, not because the house had changed, but because something inside him had stopped moving. He looked down at the gift box under his arm, the silver ribbon neat against the dark paper, and felt the weight of it become ridiculous. A wallet. Not husband. Not partner. Not the man who had paid off her credit cards when she cried at the kitchen table. Not the man who funded the first warehouse space for her boutique when every bank treated her business plan like a hobby. Not the man who covered the mortgage, insurance, groceries, advertising invoices, product photography, shipping software, weekend hotels she called networking, and the expensive brunches she said were necessary for brand building. Just a wallet. One she had not emptied yet. His first instinct was not anger. That surprised him. It was something colder, cleaner, almost frightening in its steadiness. He could have stepped into the living room. He could have made her repeat it to his face. He could have thrown the gift box onto the coffee table and demanded to know when the woman he loved had started counting him in dollars instead of years. But Calvin did none of that. He slowly set his suitcase upright beside the entry bench. He took out his phone, started recording, and held it low near his coat, just long enough to capture the end of Melissa's laughter and Tara's voice saying, "Girl, you trained him perfectly." Melissa answered, "That is what happens when a man is too predictable to notice what is happening." Calvin stopped the recording. Then, with a calm that felt almost separate from his body, he lifted the phone and took a picture of the hallway clock. 9:13 in the evening. The time mattered now. Details mattered now. The things he had once ignored for the sake of peace had become evidence. In the living room, Melissa kept talking, her voice fading into complaints about business expenses, a spa weekend, and how Calvin always asked too many boring questions about the joint account. He listened for another few seconds, not because he needed more pain, but because sometimes a man has to hear enough truth to stop negotiating with denial. Then he picked up his suitcase, turned around, and stepped back outside into the cold. The door closed behind him with a soft click. No slam, no scene, no warning. He stood on the porch while snowflakes melted against his shoes, looking through the window at the warm light of a house he had paid to keep warm. The earrings were still in his hand. For a moment, he almost left them on the porch. Instead, he slid the gift box into his coat pocket, walked back to his truck, and drove 3 blocks to a quiet parking lot near a closed pharmacy. Under the pale glow of a street lamp, he opened his banking app. Joint checking, joint credit card, business support transfers, automatic payments, subscription charges, boutique expenses, personal purchases labeled as marketing. The numbers loaded one by one, and for the first time, Calvin did not see generosity. He saw a pattern. At 10:06, he opened a new note on his phone and typed one word at the top, timeline. Then he added the first entry. Thursday, 9:13 in the evening. Heard Melissa say, "I can dump him anytime." He is just a wallet I have not emptied yet. He saved the recording, backed it up to his email, and sat in the truck with the heater humming against the Minnesota cold. His heart hurt, but his hands were steady. Melissa thought his silence meant he had not noticed. She was wrong. Calvin had noticed everything. He had just loved her too much to count it until tonight. Long before Calvin Brooks sat in a parking lot under a Minnesota street lamp, documenting the moment his wife called him a wallet, he believed providing was one of the quiet languages of love. He met Melissa 8 years earlier at a charity auction in Minneapolis, where she was volunteering behind a table of donated candles, handmade scarves, and gift baskets wrapped in crinkled plastic. She had a laugh that made people turn their heads, not because it was loud, but because it sounded like she was letting the world in on a secret. Calvin was there because his company had sponsored a small table, and he spent most of the evening feeling out of place in a room full of people who knew how to make small talk look effortless. Melissa noticed. She slid a paper plate of cookies toward him and said, "You look like a man pretending he understands silent auctions." He laughed harder than the joke deserved, and by the end of the night, he had asked for her number beside a display of ceramic mugs neither of them wanted to bid on. In the beginning, Melissa's ambition was one of the things he loved most. She talked about fashion, color palettes, online branding, and the boutique she wanted to build someday, not as a fantasy, but as if the future were already waiting for her to unlock the door. Calvin admired that. He had always been practical, careful, the kind of man who checked tire pressure before road trips and kept receipts in labeled folders. Melissa made life feel brighter, less measured. When they married, he thought their differences balanced each other. She dreamed forward. He built the floor under the dream. The first time she came home crying over her credit card debt, embarrassed and angry at herself, Calvin did not lecture her. He sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, made coffee, and helped her separate panic from numbers. Minimum payments, interest rates, due dates. It took months, but they paid it down together, mostly from his salary, though he never said it that way. He said, "We are getting clear." When she wanted to quit her office job and launch the boutique online, everyone else told her to wait. Calvin asked what she needed. A small warehouse space in a cheap industrial building outside the city. A product camera, lighting equipment, packaging supplies, a first round of inventory, social media ads, shipping software. He paid for what he could, shifted their budget, skipped a vacation they had planned, and took on extra consulting work after hours. Melissa cried the day the first order came through. She wrapped her arms around his neck and said, "You believe in me more than anyone ever has." Calvin carried that sentence like a medal no one else needed to see. The boutique did not become profitable quickly. Most small businesses do not. There were returns, slow months, ads that wasted money, photo shoots that cost more than they brought in, and inventory that sat in boxes until Melissa called it a seasonal strategy instead of a mistake. Calvin never mocked her. He paid the mortgage, insurance, utilities, groceries, and most of the credit card balance while she told people they were investing in her brand. He believed marriage meant carrying uneven weight during uneven seasons. But somewhere along the way, Melissa stopped seeing the carrying and started seeing the carrier as a permanent fixture. The thank you notes disappeared first, then the apologies after expensive mistakes, then the nervous humility that used to soften her voice when she needed help. In its place came confidence that did not match the numbers. She bought nicer clothes for networking lunches, booked spa days because she said stress hurt creativity, and upgraded her phone because image mattered in retail. Calvin tried to ask practical questions without sounding unsupportive. Is this a business expense? Do we have receipts? Can the boutique account cover it this month? Each question made Melissa's mouth tighten, as if accountability were an insult. Tara Collins entered the picture around then, a friend from a branding workshop who treated Calvin's support like proof of Melissa's power. "Girl, you trained that man perfectly," she would say, laughing over speakerphone. At first, Melissa told her not to be ridiculous. Later, she laughed too. Calvin heard enough small comments to feel the shape of the change, but he kept explaining it away. Stress, growth, pressure, image, anything but disrespect. That was the lie love told him to keep peace in the house. Because the truth was harder, Melissa had not suddenly become someone else. She had slowly become comfortable taking from a man who still believed giving meant being loved. Melissa's confidence grew in the space between what her boutique looked like online and what it actually earned. On social media, she was a founder, a stylist, a woman building an empire from taste and instinct. Her photos were bright, clean, and carefully arranged. Silk scarves draped over marble counters, coffee beside a laptop, shopping bags lined up like trophies, captions about risk, vision, and choosing abundance. Offline, Calvin saw the invoices. He saw the ad campaigns that cost more than they returned, the warehouse shelves still holding last season's inventory, the shipping supplies ordered in bulk because Melissa said growth was coming any day now. He never used those facts to embarrass her. He believed every dream had a messy backroom, and he loved her enough to keep sweeping it while she stood in the front window smiling for customers. But Melissa began living as if the image were already true. Brunch was no longer brunch, it was networking. A hotel weekend with Tara was no longer a getaway, it was brand research. A designer bag was not a purchase, it was visual credibility. Every expensive choice came wrapped in language that made questioning it sound small-minded. When Calvin asked whether the boutique account could cover a charge, Melissa would tilt her head and say, "Calvin, you do not understand how women build brands now." He wanted to understand. That was the worst part. He read articles about online retail, watched videos about product funnels, helped photograph inventory on Sunday mornings, and learned the difference between wholesale cost and perceived value because he wanted her world to make sense to him. But the more he learned, the more he saw the gap between her confidence and the books. Melissa did not want him to understand. She wanted him to fund without asking. Tara made that easier. Tara was single, sharp, and always dressed like she was about to walk into a room where someone owed her attention. She called Calvin sweet in the same tone people use for old furniture. When she came over, she praised Melissa's taste and joked that Calvin was lucky to be useful. Melissa laughed, and Calvin usually smiled because he did not want to be the insecure husband who could not take a joke. But jokes repeated often enough become instructions. One evening, while he was fixing a loose hinge on the pantry door, he heard Tara say from the kitchen island, "A man who pays without asking questions is basically passive income." Melissa said, "Stop," but she was laughing when she said it. Calvin tightened the last screw and stood there with the screwdriver in his hand, feeling the sentence settle somewhere behind his ribs. Passive income. A few months later, Melissa opened a second credit card under the boutique name and asked Calvin to guarantee it because banks still liked his income more than her projections. He signed after reviewing the terms, though something in him had begun to resist the old instinct to rescue first and ask later. She kissed his cheek that night and called him amazing. The next morning, she used the card for a luxury branding retreat at a resort outside Lake Minnetonka. When Calvin asked why the invoice included spa services, Melissa said wellness was part of entrepreneurship, and Tara backed her up with a laughing voice message about men not understanding visionary women. From then on, the spending became bolder. Personal dinners turned into client cultivation. New shoes became wardrobe investment. Gifts for Tara became collaboration expenses. Calvin would open the banking app at night and feel the numbers moving like water through a crack in a basement wall. He kept patching. He kept believing. He kept telling himself that a season of imbalance did not mean the foundation was gone. But Melissa's gratitude had changed into impatience, and impatience had changed into entitlement. She no longer asked if they could afford something. She asked why he was making money awkward. She no longer thanked him for covering gaps. She complained that his questions killed momentum. Calvin began to understand that he had not been supporting a dream anymore. He had been supporting a performance, and the audience mattered more to Melissa than the man paying for the lights. Still, he stayed. He stayed because marriage had trained him to see potential where other people saw warning signs. He stayed because he remembered the woman at the charity auction who made him laugh beside the ceramic mugs. He stayed because the sentence "you believe in me more than anyone ever" has still lived somewhere in him like a promise. But promises can become traps when only one person still honors them. By the time Calvin heard Melissa call him a wallet, the word did not come from nowhere. It was the honest name for the role she had been assigning him piece by piece, charge by charge, joke by joke, until the husband disappeared and only the funding remained. After the night in the parking lot, Calvin did not go back inside right away. He drove to a 24-hour diner 2 miles from the house, ordered black coffee he barely tasted, and opened 6 months of statements on his phone while snow collected along the window ledge beside him. At first, the numbers looked like noise, the same financial clutter every household collects when life moves faster than attention. Then the pattern sharpened. Business development at restaurants where the boutique had no clients. Networking weekends at hotels booked under Melissa's name with no corresponding sales activity. Spa packages charged the same week. She told Calvin the warehouse rent was tight. Gift cards, salon appointments, ride shares, boutique clothes, a resort invoice near Lake Minnetonka, all flowing through accounts Calvin had kept funded because he believed support meant trust. He scrolled slowly, not because he needed to discover more, but because each line taught him how much he had been choosing not to see. The worst part was not the money. Money could be earned again. The worst part was how carefully Melissa had wrapped contempt in ordinary explanations. A brunch became brand outreach. A handbag became image strategy. A hotel room became content creation. A dinner with Tara became collaboration planning. Calvin sat in the booth with his coat still on, feeling the old habit rise in him, the one that wanted to defend her even now. Maybe some of it was real. Maybe some of it had started as business. Maybe she had simply lost perspective. Then he played the recording again under the table, the volume low enough that only he could hear. "He is just a wallet I have not emptied yet." The sentence removed every soft excuse. Near midnight, a message came from Owen Parker, his closest friend from work, the kind of man who waited until he had facts before offering opinions. It said, "I hate sending this, but you need to see it." Beneath it was a screenshot from a private group chat Owen's wife had seen through a friend. Melissa's name was at the top. The message read, "I just need to pull out enough before making the split clean." Tara had replied with laughing emojis, and, "Make sure the wallet is open first." Calvin stared at the screen until the coffee in front of him went cold. The diner lights hummed above him. A waitress refilled sugar containers near the counter. 2 truckers talked softly about road conditions by the door. The world remained painfully normal while the last room of Calvin's marriage emptied itself. He did not feel rage first. He felt cold. The kind of cold that does not shake. The kind that makes the body still because it has finally stopped hoping warmth will return from the wrong place. At 1:15, he forwarded the screenshot to his email, saved it to a folder, and added another entry to the timeline. Group chat indicates plan to extract funds before separation. He wrote the words like a stranger might write them, precise and almost emotionless, because if he let the feeling in all at once, it would swallow the careful part of him still trying to stand. Then he opened the banking app again and looked at the automatic transfers. Mortgage from his income, utilities from his account, insurance, credit cards, boutique support payments disguised as shared expenses, a secondary card attached to his credit line. He did not change anything that night. That mattered. A careless man would have acted from pain. Calvin had spent 8 years being careful, and he would not let Melissa turn his first act of self-respect into something reckless. Instead, he made a list. Joint obligations, personal obligations, boutique expenses, unsupported charges, automatic payments requiring review, credit exposure, legal consultation. At 2 in the morning, he drove to a hotel near the airport, checked into a plain room with beige walls and a heater that clicked too loudly, and placed the unopened earrings on the desk beside his laptop. They looked foolish there, silver and delicate under the harsh lamp, a gift from a husband to a woman who had been discussing how much more she could drain from him. He almost put them back in his bag. Instead, he left them where he could see them while he worked. They reminded him of the difference between who he had been and who she had believed him to be. By dawn, the timeline had 16 entries. Receipts, screenshots, dates, transfers, recordings, notes. Not a revenge plan. Not yet. A record. When Owen called at 7, Calvin answered on the second ring. "Are you safe?" Owen asked. Calvin looked around the empty hotel room and gave the only honest answer he had. "I am awake." Owen was quiet for a moment. "What are you going to do?" Calvin looked at the earrings, then at the spreadsheet, then at the snow turning gray beyond the window. "I am going to stop confusing being generous with being available to be used." That morning, before Melissa even knew he had heard her, Calvin searched for a family lawyer and financial advisor in downtown Minneapolis. Rachel Monroe's name appeared twice, once in a divorce finance article and once in a referral Owen sent with the message, "She handles messy money cleanly." Calvin saved her number. For the first time in years, he did not feel like the man funding someone else's performance. He felt like the man turning on the lights backstage. Rachel Monroe's office was on the 12th floor of a glass building in downtown Minneapolis, the kind of place where the elevators moved quietly and the reception desk looked expensive without trying to. Calvin arrived wearing the same shirt from the hotel, his overcoat folded over one arm, and a black folder pressed against his side. He had slept maybe 40 minutes, but exhaustion had sharpened him instead of blurring him. The city outside was gray with morning snow, traffic crawling below like nothing important had happened to anyone. Rachel Monroe did not offer him false comfort. She shook his hand, guided him into a conference room, and let him place the folder on the table before she asked the first question. Do you want to punish your wife, or do you want to protect yourself? Calvin looked at the stack of statements, screenshots, recordings, and notes he had spent the night organizing. I want to stop being used. Rachel nodded once, as if that answer mattered. Then she began reading. She moved through the documents with a calmness that made the situation feel less like humiliation and more like something that could be handled. The recording summary. The group chat screenshot from Owen. The business expenses that did not connect to business income. The boutique credit card Calvin had guaranteed. The joint account withdrawals. The luxury charges labeled as brand development. The support payments Calvin had made for inventory, warehouse rent, advertising, software, and shipping. Rachel did not raise her eyebrows. She did not call Melissa names. She simply drew lines with a pen, separated marital obligations from personal spending, and turned emotional betrayal into categories the law could understand. This is not about closing every account in anger, she said. That would be reckless. You have shared obligations, and you need to handle them cleanly. But you do not have to leave unlimited access open while there is evidence she may be planning to drain funds before separation. Calvin listened carefully. That was the strange relief of Rachel's office. No one asked him to explain why he had stayed. No one made him defend being generous. No one treated his shock like weakness. Rachel outlined the steps one by one. His direct deposits would go into an individual account from that point forward, while agreed household expenses would still be paid. The secondary card attached to his credit line would be lowered to a small limit for verified necessities only. Boutique expenses would need to go through Melissa's business account, not the joint household account. Large withdrawals would require documentation. Automatic payments tied to luxury subscriptions, personal travel, spa services, and non-essential brand expenses would be reviewed and, where legally permitted, stopped. A formal record would be prepared for possible separation. Calvin absorbed each instruction with the quiet focus of a man learning how to close a door without slamming it. She will say I am financially controlling her, he said. Rachel placed one page in front of him. That is why we do this by documentation, not emotion. You are not cutting off shared household obligations. You are stopping unsupported personal spending and protecting marital assets after evidence of misuse. There is a difference. Calvin looked down at the page. Evidence of misuse. It sounded almost too clean for what it felt like. What it felt like was hearing his wife laugh while describing him as something to empty. What it felt like was silver earrings sitting on a hotel desk beside a spreadsheet of contempt. What it felt like was 8 years of love being translated into credit limits and transaction histories. I do not want to destroy her boutique, he said. Rachel's expression softened, but only slightly. Then do not. Let her run it with business funds, business income, and business accountability. If it is real, it can stand without being hidden inside your personal generosity. That sentence stayed with him. If it is real, it can stand. Calvin thought of Melissa's photos, the captions about independence, the way she talked online about building something on her own while his money quietly held the floor beneath her. For the first time, he wondered how much of her confidence had only existed because he kept paying for the consequences of it. Rachel prepared the first letters that afternoon. One to the bank requesting adjustments to shared account protections, one to the credit card company lowering authorized user exposure, one summary for Calvin's records, and one draft notice for Melissa if the separation conversation became unavoidable. Everything was legal. Everything was measured. Everything was colder than shouting could ever be. Before Calvin left, Rachel looked at him and said, "You are going to want one clean sentence when she asks why. Do not argue about every receipt. Do not try to win the whole marriage in the kitchen." Calvin slid the folder back under his arm. What should I say? Rachel paused. Tell her shared money is for shared obligations now. He repeated it once in his head, not as a weapon, but as a boundary. Shared money is for shared obligations now. That evening, Calvin drove back to the house just after sunset. Melissa's car was in the driveway. Lights glowed in the kitchen. He walked in quietly, carrying the same suitcase and the same gift box he had taken back out the night before. Melissa looked up from the island, surprised. I thought your flight was delayed until tomorrow. Calvin set his suitcase down. It changed. She smiled with practiced ease, already returning to the version of herself that assumed he knew nothing. You should have texted. I would have made dinner. He looked at the spotless kitchen, the unopened takeout container beside her laptop, the boutique invoices scattered near a glass of white wine. It is fine, he said. I already ate. Her smile flickered. Only for a second. Not enough to matter yet. Calvin took off his coat and hung it in the closet. The earrings stayed in his pocket. The recording stayed backed up. The account changes were already moving. Melissa thought the wallet had come home open. She did not know the lock had already clicked. For the next several days, Melissa moved through the house with the confidence of a woman who believed nothing had changed. She was almost lighter than usual, humming while she made coffee, scrolling through boutique comments at the kitchen island, telling Calvin about supplier delays and branding decisions as if he were still the quiet financial floor beneath her feet. Calvin listened with the same calm expression he had always worn, but something essential had shifted behind his eyes. He no longer heard business updates. He heard future claims being rehearsed. He no longer saw charges as temporary support. He saw doors that needed locks. On Monday morning, Melissa kissed his cheek quickly before leaving for a content shoot and said, "Can you make sure the warehouse rent clears today? I have a lot going on." The old Calvin would have opened the banking app before his first meeting and handled it without making her feel the weight of another missed deadline. This Calvin looked at his coffee and said, "Send the invoice through the boutique account." Melissa paused with one hand on her car keys. It is easier if you just pay it. It is cleaner if the business pays its own expenses. She studied him for a second, searching for the familiar softness she could press against until it gave way. Since when are we being formal? Calvin met her eyes. Since the expenses stopped being clear. Her mouth tightened, but she left without arguing because she still believed this was mood, not structure. That was her mistake. Structure does not need a raised voice to become real. By Tuesday, the first automatic charges started hitting limits. A subscription for premium brand analytics flagged for review. A luxury co-working lounge membership paused. A boutique advertising boost rejected because it was tied to Calvin's personal card instead of Melissa's business account. Each notification came to Calvin's phone, and he saved each one in the folder Rachel Monroe had told him to maintain. He did not enjoy it. That mattered to him. Enjoyment would have made this revenge. Calm record-keeping made it self-defense. Melissa, however, still treated the changes as inconvenience rather than warning. She texted him 3 question marks after the advertising charge failed. Calvin replied, "Shared funds are for shared obligations now. Please use the boutique account for boutique expenses." She did not answer for 20 minutes. Then came, "Are you seriously doing this while I am trying to grow something?" He typed and deleted 3 responses before sending only, "I am keeping household finances separate from business spending." It felt cold. It was supposed to. Not cruel, not loud, but cold enough to stop the old pattern from breathing. That night, Melissa sat across from him at dinner and talked about Tara's idea for a weekend brand retreat in Scottsdale. She described desert light, content strategy, a villa with clean walls and perfect mirrors. Calvin cut his chicken into small pieces and listened. "How much?" he asked. Melissa rolled her eyes. "You always go there. Because there is usually a number waiting. It is an investment. Then the business should make it." She set her fork down. "You are being different." Calvin looked at her plate, barely touched, then at the woman who had once cried because he believed in her more than anyone else. "Maybe I am paying attention differently." Melissa laughed once, short and dismissive, but the sound lacked its usual confidence. "Tara said you were probably just stressed from work." Tara. Even her explanations had a witness now. Calvin took a sip of water. "Tara seems very involved in our finances for someone not responsible for them." Melissa's face sharpened. "Do not start with my friends. I am not starting anything." He stood, carried his plate to the sink, and rinsed it. "I am ending a few things." She stared at his back, but he did not turn around to rescue her from discomfort. On Wednesday, Owen sent another screenshot from the same private circle, this one showing Tara joking that Melissa needed to move faster before the bank of Calvin learned math. Melissa had reacted with a laughing emoji. Calvin saved it without surprise. The pain was still there, but it no longer controlled his hands. By Thursday, the household spreadsheet was updated, the account boundaries were active, and Rachel had received every new message. Calvin continued paying the mortgage, utilities, insurance, groceries, and every shared obligation tied to the life they had legally built. But the extras, the image, the softness around Melissa's performance, the invisible subsidy of disrespect, that was ending one transaction at a time. Melissa did not fully understand until Friday morning, when she stood in their closet holding a designer purse and asked if he had seen a charge alert from the boutique card. Calvin adjusted his tie in the mirror. Yes. It says the limit is lower. It is. Why? He looked at her reflection. Because I am no longer guaranteeing lifestyle expenses as business growth. For the first time, she did not have a quick answer. Her silence followed him down the hallway as he picked up his briefcase and left for work. Behind him, the house remained warm, beautiful, and expensive, but the role Melissa had assigned him was disappearing from inside it. She still thought Calvin was being difficult. She did not yet understand that the wallet she had laughed about was no longer open, and the man holding it had finally stopped mistaking access for love. The charge declined at a restaurant called Marlowe on Lake Street, the kind of place Melissa chose when she wanted her life to look effortless in photographs. It was Saturday afternoon, and Minneapolis sat under a pale winter sky, bright enough to make the snowbanks outside the windows glow blue at the edges. Melissa sat between Tara Collins and two women from a branding group, all of them dressed in soft neutrals, gold jewelry, and the polished confidence of people who believed every meal could become content if the lighting was right. Tara had ordered carefully arranged appetizers, sparkling water with lime, and a round of alcohol-free champagne, because she said the day needed to feel celebratory without looking messy. Melissa laughed along, her phone angled toward the table, the boutique's latest scarf collection draped over the back of a chair for a casual photo that was not casual at all. This year is about upgrading, Tara said, lifting her glass. No more shrinking for men who do not understand vision. One of the women smiled. And no more carrying dead weight. Melissa felt the old thrill of being admired, the dangerous warmth that came from people speaking as if confidence could replace consequences. She leaned back and said, "Exactly. I am finally choosing myself." Tara's eyes glittered. "And once the split is clean?" Melissa gave a small smile, the same one Calvin had once loved because he thought it meant she was dreaming. "Then I build without anyone slowing me down." No one at the table mentioned who had paid for the building so far. When the bill came, Melissa reached for the authorized user card linked to Calvin's credit line with the smooth motion of habit. She barely looked at the total. She had never needed to when Calvin was the one quietly absorbing the numbers later. The server returned less than a minute after leaving, polite but tense, holding the small black folder close to her apron. "I am sorry," she said softly. "This card was not approved. Would you like to try another?" The table went still. Not dramatically. Worse. Carefully. Tara looked down at her napkin. One of the branding women pretended to check a message. Melissa felt heat climb up her neck. "That is impossible," she said, keeping her voice low. The server gave the practiced half-smile of someone trained not to react. "It may just be a bank issue." Melissa took the card back with fingers that suddenly felt too visible. She tried again. Same result. The second silence had weight. Tara leaned closer and whispered, "Call him." Melissa hated the way that sounded. Him. The man they had all treated like background now needed to make the room comfortable again. She stepped toward the front of the restaurant, phone pressed to her ear, turning her back on the table as Calvin answered after the third ring. His voice was calm. "Melissa, my card is being declined," she said, trying to make it sound like an administrative mistake rather than panic. "At Marlowe." She froze. "How do you know where I am?" The alert came through. "Then fix it." There was a pause, not long, but clean enough to feel deliberate. "Shared funds are for shared obligations now. Use your business account." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out at first. Through the glass, she could see Tara watching her from the table, no longer smiling. "Calvin, I am with people." Then use the account connected to the business you were discussing with them. You are humiliating me. His voice did not change. No, I am no longer funding the performance. The line stayed open for one more second, then ended. Melissa stared at the screen. For years, Calvin had never hung up before making sure she was all right. This time, he did not ask. She returned to the table with her own card, the one tied to the boutique account, and the transaction went through only after she moved money from savings under the table while pretending to answer a text. The women smiled too brightly. Tara said, "Men get weird when they feel control slipping." But the sentence sounded less powerful now that everyone had watched Melissa scramble over a bill she had treated like nothing. Outside, snow blew across the sidewalk in thin white sheets. Inside, Melissa kept smiling until her cheeks hurt. She finished the lunch, posed for one more photo, and let Tara talk about image, independence, and not letting men dictate a woman's future. But something had shifted. The chair under her no longer felt like part of a stage. It felt like a balance beam. Every word she said had to stand over the knowledge that Calvin had not yelled, accused, or threatened. He had simply removed the invisible hand holding up the picture she sold to everyone else. By the time she drove home, anger had replaced embarrassment because anger felt safer. She rehearsed what she would say. How dare he freeze her out? How dare he make her look small? How dare he change the rules without asking? But beneath every rehearsed line was the sentence she could not outrun: use your business account. It should have been simple if the boutique was everything she claimed. It should not have felt like falling. When Melissa pulled into the driveway, the house was lit from the kitchen. Calvin's truck was there. She walked inside ready to turn shame into accusation. Then she saw him sitting at the table with a white envelope beside his hand, and the anger in her throat went quiet before she understood why. Melissa stood in the kitchen doorway with her coat still on, her purse hanging from one shoulder, and the taste of humiliation still burning in her mouth from Marlowe. She had driven home rehearsing anger, but the white envelope on the table took the air out of every sentence she planned to throw. Calvin sat across from it in a dark sweater, calm, clean-shaven, and too still for a man who had supposedly acted out of jealousy or panic. The kitchen lights were warm. Snow tapped softly against the window over the sink. On the counter, the unopened gift box from Chicago sat beside his keys, silver ribbon catching the light like something from a life that had ended before it was given. Melissa pointed at the envelope. "What is that?" Calvin did not make her wait. Rachel Monroe's office. The name meant nothing to her until she saw the letterhead printed in the corner. Her face changed. "You hired a lawyer?" "I hired someone to help me separate facts from feelings." She let out a sharp laugh because laughter was the first place she ran when fear came too close. "So now you are punishing me because your card embarrassed me at lunch?" Calvin looked at her for a long moment. "No, the card embarrassed you because you thought it was still open for anything. It was a business lunch. Then the business account should cover it." Melissa dropped her purse on the counter harder than necessary. "You had no right to do that to me in front of my friends." His voice stayed level. "I did not do anything in front of your friends. I changed financial access after reviewing unsupported spending from shared accounts." "Unsupported spending?" she repeated, like the words were insulting because they were precise. Calvin slid the envelope toward the empty chair. "Read it." She did not sit at first. She stood over the table and pulled out the papers with quick, angry hands. The first page listed temporary financial boundaries. The second listed shared obligations still being paid: mortgage, utilities, insurance, groceries, household maintenance. The third listed expenses requiring review: boutique charges, travel, spa services, restaurant bills, brand retreats, gifts, advertising boosts tied to Calvin's personal credit, and hotel weekends labeled as business development. Her eyes moved faster, then slower. "You have been tracking me. I have been tracking our money. That is controlling." Calvin nodded slightly, as if he had expected the word. "Rachel said you might call it that. That is why the household bills are still paid and documented. What is ending is unlimited access for spending that does not support the household and does not belong on my credit line." Melissa's cheeks flushed. "You are making me sound like some kind of thief." "No," he said. "I am making the pattern visible." She turned another page and froze. There was the group chat screenshot Owen had sent. Her own words sat in black and white. "I just need to pull out enough before making the split clean." Beneath it was Tara's reply about making sure the wallet stayed open first. Melissa's grip tightened until the paper bent. Where did you get this? That is not the important question. It was private. So was our marriage. That silenced her for half a breath. Then she found the note about the night he came home early, the hallway clock, the recording, the sentence she had said when she thought he was still in Chicago. Wallet, I have not emptied yet. The phrase looked uglier on paper than it had sounded in the living room, stripped of laughter, stripped of Tara's approval, stripped of the performance that made cruelty feel like confidence. Melissa swallowed. Calvin, that was a joke. He looked at the gift box on the counter, then back at her. A joke does not come with 6 months of receipts. The kitchen went quiet except for the soft click of the furnace coming on. Melissa sat down slowly, as if her knees had finally understood what her pride refused to admit. You should have talked to me. Calvin's expression did not change, but pain moved through his eyes, brief and unmistakable. I came home with a gift to surprise my wife. I heard her telling someone she could dump me after emptying me. That was you talking. She looked away first. For years, she had counted on his generosity being emotional before it was financial. If Calvin paid, it meant he believed. If Calvin asked questions, she could call him unsupportive. If Calvin hesitated, she could make him feel small until he opened his hand again. But now his hand was closed, and worse, it was steady. What happens now? She asked, and her voice sounded smaller than she wanted it to. Calvin placed one more page on the table, a summary for a separation consultation. Now we communicate in writing about major expenses. Boutique spending goes through your business account. Shared money stays for shared obligations. And if you still want to make the split clean, we do it with full records. Melissa stared at him. You are really going to treat me like this? Calvin stood, picked up the unopened earrings, and slid the box into a drawer without giving it to her. No, Melissa. I am finally going to stop treating you like someone who loved me while you treated me like something to drain. The meeting in Rachel Monroe's office happened the following Tuesday, high above downtown Minneapolis, with snow moving past the windows in thin white lines and the city below looking quieter than it really was. Melissa arrived 10 minutes late, wearing a cream coat and the careful expression of a woman preparing to explain herself before anyone else defined her. Calvin was already seated beside Rachel, his black folder on the table, his wedding ring still on his hand, but no longer carrying the same promise in his eyes. That was the first thing Melissa noticed. Not anger, not hatred, distance. Rachel began without drama. She placed the timeline in front of them and walked through it cleanly. 8 years of financial support, boutique startup costs, credit card guarantees, warehouse rent, advertising payments, shared account transfers, luxury spending labeled as business development, the group chat about pulling out enough before making the split clean, and the recorded comment that had finally shown Calvin what his generosity had become in Melissa's eyes. Melissa tried to interrupt twice. The first time, she said Calvin was overreacting to a joke. The second time, she said he was trying to control her by limiting money. Rachel did not argue. She simply turned to the pages showing the mortgage, utilities, insurance, groceries, and household obligations Calvin continued to pay. Shared obligations remain covered, Rachel said evenly. What changed was unsupported personal and business spending through accounts he is legally and financially exposed to. The sentence was dry, almost boring, and that was what made it powerful. Melissa could fight emotion. She could not flirt with a spreadsheet. She could not charm a bank statement. She could not make 6 months of receipts laugh along with Tara. Calvin sat quietly until Rachel finished, then looked at Melissa for the first time since the meeting began. I did not close the wallet to punish you, he said. I closed it because I finally realized you never saw the man holding it. Melissa's face crumpled, but he did not rush to soften the moment. That had been his role for too long. Pay the bill, explain the number, absorb the insult, protect her from the consequence, then apologize for making money feel uncomfortable. He was done translating disrespect into stress. Melissa wiped under one eye. I was scared, she whispered. The business was not where I said it was. Tara made it sound like I had to look successful before I could become successful. Calvin nodded once. And I was the cost of looking successful. She had no answer. Outside, snow crossed the glass like static. Rachel outlined the next steps. Written communication for major expenses, review of shared accounts, separation of boutique finances from household money, and a formal process if either of them chose to end the marriage. Every item sounded calm, measured, adult. Nothing about it looked like the revenge Melissa had expected. That frightened her more. Revenge would have meant Calvin was still emotionally reaching for her, still trying to make her feel what he felt. This was colder. This was a man removing access. When the meeting ended, Melissa followed him into the hallway. "Calvin," she said, her voice thin. "Do you still love me?" He stopped near the elevator. For a moment, the question pulled him backward through every version of them. The charity auction, the cookies, the first order from her boutique, the night she said he believed in her more than anyone ever had, the years when he mistook funding her dream for being included in it. "I loved being your husband," he said, "but I cannot stay married to someone who looked at my love and saw available credit." The elevator doors opened. Melissa stepped forward like she might follow, then stopped. "I did not mean to lose you." Calvin looked at her, tired and steady. "No, you meant to use me until leaving felt convenient. Losing me was the part you forgot to budget for." Then he stepped inside, and the doors closed before she could turn regret into another request. Calvin did not feel victorious as he walked out into the cold Minneapolis afternoon. He felt clean in a way that hurt, like taking off a bandage and seeing the wound honestly for the first time. The wallet was closed, but more than that, the man had stepped back from the table where his worth had been counted only when someone wanted to spend it. What do you think hurt Melissa more, losing access to Calvin's money, or realizing he had finally stopped offering his heart along with it? Share your thoughts, because stories like this remind us that generosity is not weakness, support is not permission to exploit, and love should never be measured by how much someone can take. If you believe quiet strength, dignity, and hard truth deserve to be heard, make sure you subscribe so you do not miss the next story.